接下来的4:10至5:10将进行本日下午第5场议程，此议程以英文进行。This meeting will run from 4:10 to 5:10. Now let's welcome our speaker, Matsumoto Yukihiro-san. He's going to share with us about the topic of how to design the future. He is the chief designer of the Ruby programming language, also known as Matz. Without further ado, now please join me in welcoming our speaker, Matsumoto Yukihiro-san.
はい、こんにちは。Hello.
こんにちは。Okay, let's start our meeting.
Hello there. This is Matz, the creator of the Ruby language. I'm very glad to have me here. I've heard this year we have non-Ruby audiences to the keynote. So I will explain about I will pick the Ruby as an example to explain how to design the future. Because when we create a software or service or a product, so that we are creating part of the future. So to create the great software or great service or product, that we have to consider creating the future. So that let me explain about how I created Ruby, the great software. In 1993, I started developing Ruby. I created Ruby. The Ruby was the language of the future at the point. So that so by creating Ruby, I somehow created the future from the viewpoint of the 1993. Later, Ruby influenced many other regions. Like Ruby influenced the software industry, and many people created the great software using Ruby, like Ruby on Rails and many websites, including Twitter, GitHub, the Instacart, the Shopify, many other great services are implemented in Ruby. And in addition, so many programming languages are influenced by Ruby language. For example, the Ruby and Elixir, maybe Swift, and many other programming languages are influenced by Ruby. So I look back the history, so that why or how I could design the future language. The first factor of the designing great future language was knowledge. Actually, I have been a language geek, the big fan of programming languages for life. Actually, I started programming when I was 15, and soon after that, I became the fan of programming languages. I have been interested in programming language since then. So as a result, I know very many programming languages. By designing Ruby, I combined many good aspects or good features of the many programming languages, so that in one. For example, so the Lisp was my favorite programming languages, especially the design of the closed common Lisp object system was very beautiful, and I learned many aspects of object-oriented programming from them. And then the C was my favorite programming language. I still programming in C, and I I spend more time in programming in C rather than Ruby, so that I I I consider myself as a C programmer. C is my favorite programming language, and as a language design, I prefer Ruby to C, but yeah, I spend more time in C. The Perl, I learned a lot from Perl, so that I borrowed, or maybe I stole many features from the Perl programming language. And then when I created Ruby, Python was already there, so that I took some features from Python, namely the def keyword to define the method, and the class keywords to define the class. And then in addition, there are many other programming languages I learned, and I borrowed the features from. For example, the Smalltalk was the father of the object-oriented programming languages. So that I learned like a hierarchy of the class library or the many things from Smalltalk. Then Clue. Clue was the language designed in MIT in 1970s, and it has the unique features called iterators. And then I borrowed iterators and then turned into the blocks. And then Ruby block is kind of unique things, but its basic design was borrowed from the language named Clue from MIT. Icon was the language designed in the University of Arizona, I think. And it was a pretty impressive language to learn. And then the the first exception system uh, of the Ruby language was taken from Icon, but later changed to the uh, changed to something similar to Python. And then IFL was the language designed by the computer scientist named Barton Mayer, and I in in 80s I learned from the Mayer's book the object-oriented software construction, and I was impressed a lot. So I learned some feature from IFL, especially the keywords like require, ensure, and rescue taken from IFL. Uh, Seder was the language similar to IFL, and then it was designed in the University of California, uh, Berkeley, I think, in 90s. And I learned something I took something from the Seder. For example, the keyword undef and alias. Those concepts are taken from the early version of Seder language. And I have been the Emacs list programmer, so that not the language wise, but implementation wise, I learned a lot from the implementation of the Emacs list. And ELK was the implementation of the scheme language. And I read through the ELK source code, and yeah, I studied a lot how to implement the programming language. And I learned many things from a lot more programming languages. So by having those knowledge from those programming languages, so that I could design the Ruby. So that means the ignorant cannot make the future. So that we have to learn about the background knowledge and computer science and many things. We have to have knowledge to create the future. But we need something modern knowledge to create the future, which is, I think, passion. So as I told you, I have been a language geek since I was 16. So that I love programming language, not only Ruby, not only some picky programming language like a C, Smalltalk, Lisp, and I love almost all programming language except few. So that yeah, I when I was 15, I I was interested in psychology and human mind and ergonomics and natural language, human language, and the programming. So all things I was interested in when I was 15. And programming languages a combination of many those things. The programming language a language, and of course it's for programming, and its design was some kind of the ergonomics, and the background of ergonomics is how we feel when we programming in that language. That is psychology. So it's kind of the connecting the dots, the psychology, ergonomics, programming, the human languages. So that by combining those dots, so the programming languages are formed. But so that was quite natural for me to you know for me to feel that I wanted to create my own programming language. I want to design my programming languages. That that's why I learned so many programming languages. Someday in the future, I want to create my own programming languages, a part of the my future. So that uh, so I learned programming language to take good things out of those languages. That's why and how I studied programming languages. So the passion. So that's the source of my passion toward the programming languages. I wanted to create my own programming languages for my joy. Then the third important factor to design the future, to create the future, is confidence. Uh, 1995, I released Ruby to the internet. Soon after that, I heard a lot of noises, a lot of complaints from audiences. For example, we already have Perl, so that we don't need no more programming languages. Or we already have Python, so that we don't need any new programming languages. Or okay, your programming looks nice, but actually we don't need object-oriented programming for scripting languages. Or uh, Ruby is too good for the scripting languages. Yeah, we yeah that was I really get that kind of the complaint things. Hmm. So that from my advice is don't listen to the complaints, because as Henry Ford once said, if I had asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. But now, today, we don't see horses that much. They are replaced by the automobile. So my advice is don't ask for solutions. Their solutions are useless. the many people are not to be prepared to predict the future. But their problems are real. So that don't ask for the solutions, but ask for the inspirations. They prepare the nifty, nice solutions using your knowledge, passion, and then that's the part of the future. And then try to solve their problem. Don't try to implement their solutions. The other important factor of the creating the future is community. Actually, community is mandatory for 21st century products. But most of our softwares are open source. And many of them are developed in the social or bazaar style. The community is very crucial for the success of the software or services. So that you need to attract community. So that to form the community, we have some secret ingredients. The first is keep progressing. Most of the community, especially the community around the open source software, you know, they're voluntarily, so that they are not forced to join the community, but they use the software and they're interested in the software. Then they gradually join the software and interested in the software. And if they are bored, they would become bored, so that they would leave. So that to attract the member of the community, so you have to keep progressing. You have to make you have to keep moving forward, so that otherwise, so that they are bored, they would leave. And then the second thing is inspired community. So that if they are inspired by being the member of the community, so that they would love to be part of the community. For that, the philosophy or policy are pretty much important. So what is the key philosophy of your product? For example, Ruby, key concept, key philosophy of the Ruby language is joy. But 20 something years ago, so that the language designers do not focus on human or the mind. How they do not focus on how we feel when we program in those languages. But I focus on the human side. The focusing on the people, programmers, and I focused in having joy. That is kind of unique at the moment. So that was a key philosophy, key policy, and that policy attracts the people. In addition, so that you don't have to be perfect. Your software do not have to be perfect. My example was that I'm a programmer, but I'm not a super programmer. So that I made many bugs in implementation of the Ruby language. So that many people reported the bugs, and even fixed them, and sent us the patches. So that, and then they gradually involved in the development of the Ruby languages. But our core team members, people who okay, I can fix those problems, okay, and then I can involved in the in the development of the programming language. If if I was the super programmer and I made no bugs, so that those people haven't involved uh, in the core team, so that my imperfection uh, led them join the community, join the core team, so that you don't have to be perfect, or maybe it's okay to be imperfect. The involvement is pretty much important, and the welcoming community is pretty much important. That we in our in Ruby community we have the word okay we have the word like a min MINASWAN minaswan, and that stands for the Matz is nice and so we are nice. And yeah, I'm not sure I'm a pretty much nice people, and at least I'm trying to be nice, and they feel they try I am trying to be nice, and so we the people in the Ruby community are also trying to be nice. The those nice community is the treasure of the Ruby community. Uh, the community is not a mere user groups. A community help each others and strengthen the product. The community make the product better. So uh, that's why I said uh, the community is important for the software of the in the 21st century. Community matters. So mind your community. Uh, in addition, the other important factor of the success to create the future is the timing and luck. I'm sorry. I released Ruby to the internet in 1995. The 1995 was a unique year, the year of the many popular programming languages. For example, PHP was released. The first release of the PHP was somewhere between the 94 and the 95. And the Java was released in 1995. And JavaScript was released in 1995. And as I said to you, the Ruby was released in 1995. So the 1995 is the time for the internet languages. The PHP was great for the internet. Java was grown uh, behind the internet. JavaScript was used for the browsers, the core of the internet, and the Ruby was used in the many web services, web applications, thanks for the Rails and the many other web application frameworks. The, but you know, you just you know you cannot create the programming language at the blink, so that you need time. So that I started programming, creating Ruby, developing Ruby in 1993, and I released in 95. So that it was great timing for me. So that if I created Ruby probably 10 years later, so that I think it was too late. So that 1990, starting 1993, the releasing 1995 was the great timing for the Ruby. So that I was lucky. That that kind of luck is important factor to create the future. But I know, you cannot control it, but you can predict it. But as a background knowledge, then you can predict uh, what will become more important in the future, near future, maybe 2 years later or 3 years later. Then try to solve the problem for the future, so that kind of things would lead you to create the future. The last factor is performance. Uh, as a programmers, we care performance, probably too much. Uh, but and how we measure performance, especially for languages, we use micro benchmarks, like calculating Fibonacci numbers or factorial numbers and Fibonacci numbers or word counting. And are they really related to real world performance? No. But people make decisions on force measurement, like they rely on the micro benchmarks, choose the language or frameworks for the next project. That's kind of silly, and Ruby is fast enough because many big services like GitHub, Shopify, Instacart, and some part of the Hulu is using Ruby, so that Ruby is fast enough, but performance forms repetition, and performance measured by micro benchmarks forms repetitions. So that we will improve that. That's why we are focusing on the performance, not only for real world applications, but for the real world, but for micro benchmarks too. Uh, that is the reason we have improved the garbage collector a lot in the last few years for Ruby implementation, and we added the JIT compiler, and we are improving them, so that kind of things. That is the reason the performance is very important. As the last word, to create the future is seeking for good. No one knows the future. No one can predict the future for sure. So that we can just predict it. And prediction is seeking future good. You know, by creating great software, you will create the part of the future. That means that we have to seek something good in the viewpoint, from the viewpoint of the future. But that means that we have to define good from the viewpoint of the future. That is quite difficult things. So that, because no one knows the future. But Alan Kay, the father of the Smalltalk programming language, once said that the best way to predict the future is to invent it. The best way to predict the future is to invent it. That's the reason he created the Smalltalk programming language. He didn't try to create a language. The Smalltalk language is not his focus. He wanted to predict and create the future of programming. And the Smalltalk programming language is the part of his tools to predict the future. The the researchers in the Palo Alto research in the Xerox company first created the super fast computer at the moment named Alto. And then they created the programming language, dynamic programming language. That is easy to experiment, easy to improve, uh, which is named Smalltalk, to experiment. So the reason why he said the best way to predict the future to invent it, because we only learn from experiences or from experiments. So that once we experiment the part of the future, so that you can only know this is the right future or this is the good things in the from the viewpoint of the future, or it is fail. So that we need to experiment a lot and fail a lot and then learn a lot. That's the only way to predict the future. That's the background of the why, the quote of the Alan Kay. So that only after experiment a lot and then fail a lot and then learn a lot, so then we can create the future. So that once you create the future, or once you get the grip of the future good, so that try to implement it. Uh, don't listen to the advice from the audience. The, just seek for the inspiration from the potential users. But don't ask for the solutions to the audience. And then you have to form the community around it. And then the implementing software, and then improving the software, the growing the software is pretty much interesting and fun. And then share those fun with the community. Enjoy with the community. That's the key factor of the creating the future. Then you have to keep progressing. You have to keep moving forward because that's the only way to keep attracting the community around the software. And then if you can do that, so that experiment a lot, fail a lot, learn a lot, to take a grip of the future, then create the solutions, your solutions to the future, and form the community, and enjoy with the community, and keep progressing. If you can do them, you will be the master of the future. So that I believe if you follow those guidelines, then you can create the future. You can design the future. That is the lessons I learned from the history of the Ruby success. And yeah, I don't say you will succeed 100%, but maybe 40 to 50% of your challenge will success by following those guidelines and steps. And then I'm sure once you succeeded, you will be the master of the future. And then you can try many times until you succeed. So that if you try, say, 5 times, you will be, say, 80% chance to success. Then try it, experiment it, repeated, and then part of the creator of the future. That's what I did, and you can do it too. Thank you. Uh, this is a little bit shorter than I expected. So, yeah, I will accept the Q&A session later, probably. And at the moment of this recording, I'm not sure yet, but I will contact with the organizer later, and probably I will have some Q&A sessions after the keynote. Anyway, thank you for having me to the conference, and I hope you created a great feature, and I hope you enjoy this talk, and you will enjoy programming, the happy hacking. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Matsumoto-san. Thanks for your informative sharing. Now we are going to have the Q&A session, and we will now open the floor to the audience. Please feel free to ask any questions. And in my share screen is the question list. Please welcoming our speaker to answering. The microphone is not open. Please unmute the microphone. Yeah, thank you.
Sorry. Yeah. Okay. I have several questions, so I will answer one by one. So the first one is how to become a language geek. That is very, I didn't choose to be a language geek, but the region of interest is the psychology and the ergonomics and programming, and the intersection of my interest was the languages, programming languages. So that I don't know, but language itself is the very hot topic for the programmers. So that having interested and studied in the programming language itself help you a lot. And if you have enough motivation behind to the programming languages, you can be a language geek. And I believe that being language geek help you a lot as a programmer.
Okay, the next question.
About the Ruby community, which part do you consider is unique, and what part do you think is the improvable? I think it's the barrier between the developers, really, the programmers, developers who develop Ruby itself, and the other Ruby users. The barrier between those two groups are lower than other software. As open source software, everyone can join to the development community, but you can join to the development team relatively easily, but it requires the knowledge for the C programming. But if you clear that kind of barrier, so that we welcome to everyone to be part of the development community. It is one thing is the unique for the Ruby, I believe. And the improvable things is the language barrier. I'm a Japanese, and I'm very good at Japanese, but not that much for English nor Chinese. So that we have to communicate in bad English. So that kind of the language barrier can be improvable. Yeah, maybe using the Google Translation or something like that, the technology.
Okay, and another question.
I remember your advice of the Japan government. Could you choose what kind of topics have you discussed when meeting with them? I used to be a part of the Japanese government IT section and advisory, and back then, yeah, I was resigned 2 years ago of the fullness of the terms. So that when I was in a member of the advisory, I talk about the Japanese IT education and uh, and some kind of the IT the government IT policy. And one of the things is that Japanese government back then, the Japanese government is setting up some kind of the educational program for the IT in general, and I advise them not to have some kind of the class for the strict education curriculum. That instead, we wanted them the children to experience programming, and then they learn through those kind of experience. Otherwise, learn programming like mathematics or the science. That kind of I was afraid that kind of that curriculum itself hinders the motivation for the children. So that and yeah, in 2020, last year, so the Japanese government set up the curriculum for the IT education, and they basically follow that kind of the principle, so that focusing on experiences rather than learning. And I'm glad that the government takes that kind of steps.
Okay, thank you for your answer.
Yep. Next question. What's the current status of the commercialization for Ruby? Ruby itself is not the commercial software. It's open source software, so that it's basically the free, as in freedom, and so that you can use it for any business or the service or even the government without paying anything to me. So that there's no such things as a commercialization. But the development of Ruby costs some kind of money. So that some voluntary sponsors, especially companies, are helping us becoming sponsors, and some of us are hired by those kind of the companies to develop Ruby full time. So that except that the Ruby is totally free of charge and free as in freedom. Next question. Use one language to solve every problem, or there must be the most suitable language for a specific task. I don't think there's one true programming language to rule the all. So that there is room for the many programming language out there to solve the particular problems. So, for example, we are not going to write operating system in Ruby, but in C, or maybe in the future in Rust. So that every language has its characteristic and the specific domain, so that you don't have to pick one language and use it for everything. Except you are better to pick the suitable language for every task. Can you mRuby? Yeah. Can you share about your future plan about mRuby? Okay. The near future, we are going to release the mruby 3.1 in September, or I hope within September, within the month of September, and it will improve both the performance of the memory consumption, and the mruby 3.1 will be the more compliant to the Ruby 3.0. Yeah, we are working on it. Okay, next question. What's your least favorite language? Least. Actually, I love all programming language, but I'm not good at some of the functional programming, so that I'm not good at writing Haskell or Camel. But it does not mean that I don't like them. So that I like them all, but I'm not good at some of them. Well, next one. What timing that we can bring our project into community? You don't decide. And the software is basically requires any software basically requires community or the group of users to success, so that you have to communicate with your users. And then in my definition, that every users of your product is form the community of your product. So that say in that sense, the timing to form the community is from the beginning. That only one user, you, the member of your product. Yes.
Someone who informed me that some questions was put up that I didn't see
Did
that.
I miss something?
So yes, maybe this question.
How do you think about? Okay, the static typing. Yeah, static typing. Yeah, I know the benefit of the static typing. So the programming experience of the TypeScript is far better than the plain JavaScript. So in that sense, the static typing helps developers a lot. But at the same time, I'm a pretty lazy programmer, so that I do not want to write the type annotations and type declaration everywhere. So that that's why we try the tool assist for the static type checking for Ruby language. Now we are not going to add the type declaration to the language. Instead, so that we add some kind of the tools to the scan and analyze the type information from your Ruby programs. So that then the check the type for those Ruby programming without adding any type annotations. So that I want to have the best part of the both world of the static typing and the dynamic typing. So how do you think about the ML/AI assisted program like Google Copilot? So that I'm true believer of the AI assisted pair programming, for example. So that I wanted to have some kind of the smart assistant that driven by the artificial intelligence, but not as the tools of the Google GitHub Copilot, because it's inserted the code snippet, but that's not what we want. At least I want. I want the AI assistant says that okay, I don't want to write this kind of code and seek for the article for the algorithm or the code then if I write some kind of the buggy code, and the AI assistant helps me to realize that kind of the bad manner of the writing code or something like that. So that I wanted to talk with the AI assistant in my programming, like the pair programming with the computer. But actually, the GitHub Copilot only types ahead of us the quoting from other programmers. That's not what I want. So I really expect about the AI assistant for the programmers, but not the Google GitHub Copilot.
And
How do I learn new programming language? As a language designer, I do not write much programs in new programming language. So that for me, so that I'm pretty much interested in the design and ideas of the programming language. So that I read the tutorials and the language reference, but probably when I learn programming in the specific programming language, probably I read the software written in that kind of language. For example, when I was a student in the university, I read through the source code of the Emacs editor, and then I learned a lot from reading the source code. So the reading source code is the best source of knowledge for the programmers.
okay.
You mentioned not all the language you like. Could you provide any specific language feature you dislike or explain why? What specific language features? Well, probably I have several things, but I cannot think of any at the moment. I'm sorry, but some programming, some features in the programming language, the mere experiment, especially for the old programming language, because of now we have some kind of the common sense, but a few decades ago, there's no such things as a common sense in the programming language. So that those days, the language designers experiment many things to gradually form the common sense in the present day. That some of them are pretty nasty. For example, the computational go-to in the Fortran programming language, and that is pretty bad. And we have several things, several those kind of the abundant ideas, but nowadays most programming languages have those kind of the stupid from the common sense, stupid ideas in our common sense. What's the what else?
Let me see. Oh, this question not bad answer. Maybe
there are a lot of commenters predict that Ruby is the dying language. Is there a strategy to save it from dying? The people, some people like hitting the drowning dog or something like that. When if the popularity ranking of the Ruby language is getting lower, and some people claim to some people love to claim that Ruby is dying or something, and pretty often we see that the articles say that it claims that Ruby is dead or something like that. But in reality, the Ruby is far from dead, and Ruby is used by many big companies, including GitHub and Shopify and the Instacart or many other big companies. So that we don't have to worry about the dying at the moment. But the nature of the open source software, so that we have to keep moving forward, so that we are trying to add new things and try to improve the performance and improve the memory consumption, and adding new features that to improve the experience of the Ruby programmers. So that kind of the continuous improvement is the key to avoid dying as an open source software.
Yeah.
How about the Crystal language? Recently, I joined the Crystal language conference, and I pretty much honored to be the grandfather of the Crystal language. And, Crystal is the language of the statically typed dialect, of the Ruby language, and but it started to evolve in its own way, and I'm pretty much honored to be inspires them to create new programming language and broaden, make the world better as in a view of the programming language experience. Do your children like programming? I have 4 children, and none of them have shown interest in programming.
Okay. And
some Ruby developers think that Ruby is let black magic codes too easy to be written. Makes project too difficult to be maintained. How do you think about it? The Ruby is mere tool. Ruby only is a tool, so that if you fall into the black magic or something, so that it's your fault. So the discipline yourself. Ruby is powerful, and Ruby lets you enjoy programming, but at the same time, Ruby spoils you, so that you have to discipline yourself to be a great programmer or to create the great software. Is sponsorship sustainable to maintain the community? Sponsorship is necessary because of the free software, open source software does not, we don't sell them. So that we need to sustain our lives to continue development. So that at the moment, sponsorship is the best way to sustain our lives, because the hiring by some kind of the committee or the government or something is from my experience, those kind of the hiring by the public sector is more fragile than the sponsorship. But so we have at the moment, the sponsorship the best way I know to sustain our lives. What kind of function would make you feel regretting adequately? Okay. I have several the design regret in the Ruby language. The biggest one is some weird variables stolen from pro programming language, like a $/ or $, or something like that. But I regret them, so that it's too magical and too hard to remember. The second regret is the adding thread to the language at the very early stage of the language, because of at the time of the 1990s, when I implemented the thread to the language. So that every computer has one CPU. There's no multi-core there back then. So that I didn't consider that much about the multitasking or something. I added thread only for the the threads makes easier to describe some kind of the programming architecture, like the consumer thread consumer producer consumer model or something like that. But at the moment, the people expect a performance boost from the threads because of the multi-cores. So that the runtime design, the virtual machine design is not suitable for that kind of the performance boost from the concurrency. So that recently we added the Raster concurrency model, which is much better than the mere threads. So that if I haven't added the thread to the language, that kind of the concurrency construct is implemented much earlier. So those two duplicates. We have several other teeny regrets, but probably it's too much for the time window.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is the last questions. Okay, and we reach our time.
Yeah, we are running out of time. Thank you.
Yes. So this meeting is over. Thanks for the audience and thanks for our speaker, Matsumoto-san. This meeting is over. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Goodbye. And we have come to end of COSCUP Cross RubyConf Day 1. Thank you for your attendance. COSCUP 暨 RubyConf Day 1到这里结束，感谢大家的参与，谢谢大家。